Well, greetings and salutations, and welcome back to the paranormal side of this channel. Before we get into the absolutely terrifyingly fascinating paranormal side, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, my merch displayed directly under this video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. It is time we take that walk on the paranormal side. So let's do this, shall we? Just want to apologize first before we get into the upload. I found out earlier that my friend / landlord who was on hospice passed away this morning. And when I feel like crap or when anything feels bad, I just go into my studio and record. So if my voice is off a little bit, that's why. Also, tomorrow's upload, Dogman upload, is going to be a subscriber interview. And he is a hunter, an outdoorsman, an all-around man's man. And he's got some pretty horrifying Dogman encounters and gun battles with these creatures. So I'm looking forward to that. He sent me some pictures just showing me who he is, riding horses, taking cattle out of the mountains, hunting bull elk. So it's going to be a good interview tomorrow. Anyway, let's get into the paranormal side. Today's first experience on the paranormal side. As a clairvoyant, I've had my fair share of weird and wonderful encounters with spirits and entities. Most of them have been good, some bad, but I've only dealt with a few evil ones. This is a fairly long read detailing my encounters with a witch who tormented me for 5 years in the most horrendous ways. I don't know how she found me or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered a small country pub. The ceilings were low, and it had that musty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet rural lane surrounded by hedgerow and what looked to be farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There were 2 sections to the pub, one side which was devoid of anyone and what looked like a working bar, and on the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture, admiring the beautiful antique writing bureau, when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack, and I stumbled onto the floor. And a fear I couldn't explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong, and I had that feeling of being circled by a predator. One I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled back on the floor until my back made contact with something solid. An old dusty chest of drawers, and I tried to calm my breathing, not making any sense of why I felt like I was in danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaking, death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it. I shouldn't have looked, but the macabre sound drew my attention, like a moth to a flame. Slowly leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, a face came into view looking down over me. It was a woman, strikingly beautiful, if not cold-looking, pale blonde curls pinned to the top of her head, icy blue eyes, young no more than 30, but her mouth was what was the most terrifying. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, checkered flesh stretched even further, making her face a disfiguring, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling coming from within that cavernous abyss. I have never felt fear like that. The sort of strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream. I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched, hysterical whimper, which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up sweating and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I have never been able to get her face out of my head all of these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside of my home. In this dream, the police came, and I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants. I noticed a figure walking around the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard for me to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty hair hanging in her face. It was full of debris and dirt. She was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was that same woman I had encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm an immediate septic mess crawling with maggot and decay. The pain was what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks in my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none in the area was red, as if I had been pinched. I suspected then that these were no ordinary dreams, that she was a separate entity, not some reoccurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I physically saw snippets of her. She had a knack for showing herself two different ways, one young and beautiful, although never again with that hideous deformed mouth, and the other the stereotypical hag. Every few weeks I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out she was a dreamwalker, as I called this gift, not sure if it's the correct term, a spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was standing by my bed. She had around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe, until I woke up violently gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time, on my day off work, I woke up and, feeling lazy, decided to lounge in bed a bit longer, and in and out of sleep until I became acutely aware someone was very close to me, staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her, and everything inside of me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her," so I stayed still. Face pushed into my pillow, and then something peculiar happened. As if I was standing in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in the bed, covered up face down, and hovering about 2 feet above my body, parallel to me, there was this opaque, brown, swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleeping, half-awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside of my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lie there and pray that I did not have a heart attack, as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly and then slow down, so there were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guide shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being physically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie, to say the least, and not something I was used to having. Random spirits popping in and out had been a way of life since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after that. Although I was disheartened to know she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself to me again, she entered my dream as usual. I was lying in bed, and in this dream I awoke. My quilt was hovering a few feet above me in the air. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with her held me in place, scared of what she was going to do next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of my bed, slowly working her way up over my body until she was on top of me and her face was in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin and she smelt of damp earth, and then she spoke. "You thought I was gone." She hissed at me, and all I could do was try to scream, waking myself up. Suddenly, the quilt dropped back onto the bed, and I bolted upright, fully awake. My quilt, which I usually cocooned myself inside, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall, with the window that looked out onto the street. I refused to sleep at my home the next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all the time had passed. My last encounter I ever had with her was odd, to say the least, as it seemed as if she couldn't get close to me as usual. Again, in my dream, I awoke and she had me by my throat. Both of us dangled in the air over my bed. Here she was in her younger self, porcelain skin, fair hair, and all just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust, I don't know, just a cold indifference to me with maybe a hint of defeat. I felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside my room with me. It was the last I had ever saw of her, and hopefully ever will. I questioned myself early on whether it was a form of sleep paralysis. I knew that wasn't the case. I had never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just didn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I knew she was a healer woman in a small community, but over the time, she had seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred and shunned out of the area until she was living on the outskirts of society. Maybe once respected, then feared. I have no doubt she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately, she has passed over with them same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits which straight up terrified me. You know, I've never really thought about clairvoyance. I have and I haven't, to be honest, but it's really not something. It's hard to believe. It's hard to buy sometimes because there are so many fakes out there. But thinking about this now makes me wonder how many people that are truly clairvoyant have to deal with something like this. Must be terrifying. I mean, yeah, if you are truly a clairvoyant, it must be terrifying to see spirits on a daily basis. But then to have a spirit or an entity want to attack you and cause you physical pain is even more terrifying. I don't know. Today's second experience on the paranormal side. This happened on Shaw Air Force Base in 2005. My now ex-husband was an E6 and he worked nights on the F-16. I would be home overnights with my 2 sons aged 5 and 2. First, let me describe the house. It was a long hallway with rooms on either side, partially open floor plan with a dining room and kitchen, where there was a half a wall for part, then a whole wall. From my bedroom door, I could see the back door straight through the dining room and part of the kitchen. We had a rack on the back door where we stored dried goods, military housing, never had enough storage. One morning, I was awoken by a noise in the kitchen. I jumped out of bed afraid my younger son was getting into trouble. He is 18 now and still a pain in the ass. I didn't grab my glasses, and without them I am legally blind. I can see colors and rough shapes, that's it. I looked toward the kitchen and saw what looked like a man in an Air Force uniform. Again, I can barely see. So I'm going off color and shape. The figure was holding a box and facing the rack. Of course, I assumed it was my husband. And I say, "Hey you, want me to cook you something?" The figure moves, so it was facing me. The box drops to the floor and the figure moves to the part of the kitchen I cannot see. So my ex-husband is very unpredictable and emotionally volatile, so my assumption right here is he's mad at me for something again, and I'm going to need to deal with his attitude. I turn back to my night table and grab my glasses. Then I walk to the kitchen. This action takes 30 seconds max. It's a small house. I'm talking as I walk into the kitchen. Did something happen at work? To diffuse the situation. No response. I turn into the kitchen and no one's there. It would not have been possible for anyone to get out that back door without me hearing it, because the door squeaks. Again, it was only 30 seconds tops. I walk and glance through to the living room, which is also empty. Then I look at the time on the microwave, 0617. My husband doesn't get home until 8. Also, the box of Annie's mac and cheese was on the floor in front of the rack. This happened 16 years ago, and I still try to sort it out in my head. I don't believe in ghosts. I can say we had a few other uncomfortable incidents in that house. There was 2 bathrooms, a full one and then a small one on the master bedroom, which was our older son's room. He had toys and stuff, and we didn't need the space. He refused to use that bathroom. He said it was creepy. One time I was taking a shower in there. I can't remember why I was not using the normal bathroom. And I saw movement outside the curtain. I glanced out and I swear I saw a man in a uniform looking through the window, then dropping really quick. I screamed for my husband and he ran outside. There were no footprints or anything. I ran a daycare out of our house and occasionally would hear stuff moving around in the daycare area, especially at night. That stopped after we got a dog, so I can't rule out South Carolina giant water bugs playing in the pretend kitchen. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I know what I saw and heard. I was wide awake by that time. I was at the doorway when I saw him. I don't know what I experienced. I'm okay without knowing. I thought this would be interesting for you guys. Today's next paranormal experience is an astral projection. So before I go into detail, I want to make it clear to everyone that I realize how crazy this sounds, but I assure you it is true, every word. I would think someone was on something if they told me this, but I lived it. Sometime back in 2004 or 2005, I lived in some apartments in North Austin called International Residence. I had a small efficiency apartment by myself, and at the time I was trying to become a world-famous rapper. You can still find some of my stuff on YouTube. Anyway, I had more beer in my fridge than food. My best neighbors were the strippers that lived across the way, and they wanted to hang out with me every single day. I had no complaints, of course. Well, on New Year's, I decided I was going to my cousin's in Sealy, Texas, about 100 miles away, for a New Year's bash. I arrived in Sealy and everything's great. We party down and have a good old time out at this huge fancy ranch. After the party was over, I headed back to my cousin's, still in Sealy, mind you, and crashed out on her couch. The dream. That night I had the most vivid dream. Now, when I say vivid, I mean it was so real that I thought it was absolutely 100% true. I remember I walked up to my neighbor's door, the stripper neighbor's door, knocked, and they were having a party. They opened the door and had a house full of people. Everyone was happy to see me. I remember taking pictures with people, in particular, one of me and the stripper neighbor kissing at midnight. I remember taking shots and everything else you do at a New Year's party. I remember everything but leaving. I do remember walking out the door and then nothing the next day. The next day I wake up on the couch at my cousin's in Sealy, 100 miles away. I had to catch a bus that morning, so my cousin dropped me off and I headed back to Austin. My mom was waiting for me and she drove me home. I was walking up to my house toting my bags. I'm standing there trying to unlock my door and I hear, "Hey Grinch." That was my nickname. I got it tattooed on my back. I turned around and it was my neighbor, the stripper. Unreal. "Did you enjoy the party last night?" she asked, assuming she meant my cousin since that's where I was at. I said, "Yeah, how was your party?" She looked at me funny and said, "You should know you were there." I in turn looked at her puzzled, remembering the dream from the night before. I was in Sealy last night. Remember, I went to my cousin's. My mom just dropped me off from the bus stop. I think she realized I was serious because it took a moment to look at my bags and started saying, no way, dude, no way. "We saw you here at the party last night." "That's impossible. I passed out on a couch 100 miles away." "We took pictures of you last night, dude. I got them on my camera," she said adamantly. I assumed somebody came to their party that looked like me and they were too drunk to realize it wasn't me, and so I was like, "Let's see the pics." So we go up into our apartment and sit side by side on the couch and start looking through the pictures. The first few weren't out of ordinary, people having fun and whatnot. Then we came to a picture that looked weird. There was a guy that I knew standing with his arms up like you would if you had it around someone's shoulders and posing for a picture, but nobody was there. I started to feel cold and sweaty because I remembered that in my dream I had been in that picture. We went through a few more pics and came to the one with everyone together. I remember that also from the dream. I remember being right in the middle, but in this picture there was a blank space right where I should have been standing. I looked up at my neighbor and she's about to cry. She is so freaked out. I'm freaked out as well. Before she went any further, I told her about my dream and asked, "Did you take a picture of us kissing at midnight?" "Yes, I did," she said excitedly, frantically looking through the pictures. Then, there it was, a close-up selfie of my neighbor kissing air. There was somebody there. It was marked 12 a.m., January 1st. She dropped the camera and started pacing and saying, No, that's crazy. There's just no way." As the dream went on, more of her friends showed up and every single one said that for sure they saw me there. And we all marveled at the implications of what this meant. Years later, so I was probably 25 when that happened. I'm 41 now. I have lost contact with my stripper friend and the people I called neighbors, as people do. But often I think back about that night and try to wrap my head around it. I looked it up and I believe I performed, if that's the word, astral projection. Today's final paranormal experience. Almost a year ago, I was with my ex in the driveway of her house at 2 a.m. eating burgers, just sitting in the car having a chat. Nothing special, really. I noticed some movement out of the corner of my eye and didn't bother looking because the neighborhood is full of cats, so random darting shapes in the peripheral vision is totally normal. As time passes and our conversation continued, as I noticed that she's occasionally looking at something up the driveway, I finally ask, "See any cats?" She has a rabbit in her yard, and even in a cage she worries for him often since the cats like to sit outside of his cage and bother him, even when it's covered with blankets. She gives an odd response. "Oh yeah, I think I saw something in the driveway." She was incredibly nearsighted, and it was dark, but I overlooked the odd behavior and we continued to eat and talk. Eventually, I notice a much larger shape moving in the corner of my eye, and I can't help but look back and over my shoulder to see what it is, hoping there aren't people near the car at such a late hour. Admittedly, it's a bit of a sketchy neighborhood. What I saw just outside the back seat window was no person, however. What I can't do is describe its appearance properly. No matter how long I sat still, my brain could not fully process what I was looking at. It was just a dark, shadowy figure, roughly the size of a person, maybe 5'6". I think it had a head and a body as well, but I cannot say for certain. It was like looking at a real-life censored object, and it was staring back at me. A formless, spectral thing that immediately rang every alarm bell in my head. My eyes immediately filled with tears, my stomach dropped, and felt like I was getting pulled into its gaze. As soon as I realized it was blocking the view of the tree behind it, my fear got worse. Any hope that it was a person immediately crumbled away when it moved. It was a sort of flickering motion, as though it went from existing to not existing, from point A to point B, and extremely fast. Point B was behind the car, where it then stayed for another second before flickering out of sight completely. I turned to my ex-girlfriend, and she had the shocked look on her face and was looking at something else in the other direction. She turned to me and said, "You can see them too, right?" Realizing that I was not hallucinating and that there was more than one prompted me to say, "Yeah, let's get inside." We got out of the car, and when I turned to watch her close her door, another figure flickered past her, maybe 15 feet behind. At that point, I could physically feel 4 separate anomalies bearing down on us. I could feel the pressure of them, and my body was producing ungodly amounts of adrenaline. We made it inside, and I immediately started saying, "Holy crap, we just saw that. That was real. What was that? Spirits? Aliens?" Before she cut me off and said, "Don't talk about it. Stop talking about it." We didn't talk about it for days, but my questions burned because what I saw was so profound that my whole stance on everything was changed. Eventually, she did talk about it and confirmed that there were 3 to 4 harassing us that night. She didn't know why. I didn't know why. For the next few months, it felt like something in my mind shifted and changed a little bit. I started becoming more perceptive of weird stuff like this and became more paranoid. I even got messed with many times, and it was driving me insane. Alright guys, that is the end of the paranormal side of this channel. I want to thank everybody for always tuning in and all of the support. May the Great Spirit watch over us, and may He guide us down that path we call life. Until tomorrow, my friends.